What happens when your body is ready to release, but your mind shuts it down? When something natural gets blocked, delayed, or ignored, your entire system starts to react in ways you don't even realize. Let's talk about something most people avoid but everyone experiences. What happens when that natural release never comes? For both men and women, it's not just physical, it's mental, emotional, and deeply biological. Your body builds tension, your mind gets restless, energy that's meant to flow gets stuck, and when that happens repeatedly, it doesn't just disappear, it transforms into stress, frustration, even self-doubt. This isn't about shame, it's about awareness. Because when you understand what's happening inside you, you stop blaming yourself and start taking back control of your body, your energy, and your confidence. When the body moves toward a natural release, it activates a chain of physical responses. Muscles tighten, blood flow increases, heart rate rises, and the nervous system shifts into a heightened state. If that release doesn't happen, the body doesn't instantly return to baseline. Instead, the tension lingers. Muscles may remain slightly contracted, especially in areas like the pelvic region, abdomen, and even the shoulders. This creates a subtle but persistent feeling of pressure that can last longer than expected. Over time, repeated interruption or suppression of this cycle can make the body feel constantly on edge, as if it never fully relaxes. This buildup isn't always obvious. It can show up as restlessness, an inability to sit still comfortably, or a constant need to shift positions. Some people experience increased sensitivity in certain parts of the body, while others feel a dull, nagging discomfort that's hard to pinpoint. The nervous system also stays partially activated, which can lead to a sense of unease or agitation without a clear reason. Blood circulation patterns that we're preparing for release don't immediately normalize, adding to that lingering heaviness or tightness. As this pattern repeats, the body can begin to store that unresolved tension almost like a habit. Muscles learn to stay slightly guarded, breathing may become shallower, and the natural rhythm of tension and relaxation gets disrupted. The result is a body that feels loaded with energy but has no clear outlet, creating a constant underlying strain that quietly builds beneath the surface. When the mind is pulled into a state of anticipation and that process is interrupted, it doesn't simply reset. Attention stays hooked on the unfinished loop, creating a lingering sense of mental friction. Thoughts begin to circle back to the same point, making it harder to focus on anything else. Tasks that normally feel simple start requiring more effort and concentration breaks more easily. The brain is essentially holding onto a signal it expected to complete, so it keeps returning to it, searching for closure. This often shows up as distraction. You may find yourself checking your phone more often, switching between activities, or struggling to stay present in conversations. There's a subtle impatience that builds, not always intense but persistent enough to interfere with clear thinking. Decision-making can feel slower or less confident because your attention is split between what you're trying to do and the unresolved internal state. Even moments of rest can feel less satisfying, as if your mind refuses to fully settle. Frustration also grows in this space, not always as anger but as a low-level irritation that's hard to explain. Small inconveniences feel bigger, delays feel more annoying, and tolerance drops. The brain thrives on completing cycles, and when that completion is blocked repeatedly, it creates a sense of imbalance. That imbalance feeds the loop of distraction and restlessness, keeping the mind slightly overstimulated yet unfulfilled, making it harder to regain a steady, calm mental rhythm. When the body moves toward release, hormones and brain chemicals begin shifting to support that process. Dopamine rises during anticipation, creating focus, desire, and motivation. Adrenaline increases, raising alertness, heart rate, and physical sensitivity. In both men and women, these chemical changes prepare the body for completion by coordinating the nervous system, blood flow, muscle response, and emotional intensity. When that completion doesn't happen, the hormonal pattern can remain partially unresolved, leaving the body in a state that feels activated but unfinished. Dopamine plays a major role here. It drives anticipation and reward-seeking behavior. If the expected endpoint never arrives, the brain may continue chasing that missing sense of closure. This can increase repetitive thoughts, compulsive checking, heightened craving, and difficulty shifting attention to unrelated tasks. Instead of receiving the chemical signal that says cycle completed, the brain stays closer to still waiting, which can create a subtle but ongoing internal pull. Stress hormones can also stay elevated longer than needed. Cortisol may remain higher when frustration builds, especially if the person experiences repeated interruption, suppression, or emotional conflict around the experience. This can increase irritability, physical tension, sleep disruption, and mental fatigue. The nervous system becomes less efficient at moving from high activation into recovery. In men, testosterone is closely linked with energy, drive, and sexual function, while in women, estrogen and progesterone influence sensitivity, mood, and emotional regulation. Repeated unresolved arousal does not necessarily damage these hormones, but it can interact with emotional stress and behavioral patterns in ways that affect how balanced a person feels. Mood may become less stable, energy may feel inconsistent, and emotional reactions may intensify. Oxytocin and prolactin are often associated with post-release calm, connection, and physical relaxation. When the cycle remains incomplete, those calming shifts may not arrive in the same way, leaving the body without that deeper recovery signal. This can create a mismatch where stimulation rises but restoration doesn't follow, affecting emotional steadiness, body awareness, stress recovery, sleep quality, appetite patterns, and the ability to feel mentally settled throughout the day. Emotional irritability often builds quietly, not as a sudden outburst but as a steady shift in how you respond to everyday situations. When the body and mind enter a heightened state and don't return to balance, emotional regulation becomes more fragile. You may notice that small things begin to feel heavier than they should. A minor delay, a simple comment, or an unexpected interruption can trigger a reaction that feels stronger than the situation itself. This isn't because the situation changed, but because your internal state is already carrying unresolved tension. There's also a growing sense of restlessness that feeds into emotional sensitivity. It can feel like you're slightly uncomfortable in your own space, even when nothing is clearly wrong. This discomfort can translate into impatience, where waiting feels harder, silence feels longer, and stillness feels unnatural. As a result, interactions with others may become shorter or more reactive. You might respond quickly without fully processing, or feel the urge to withdraw because engaging feels mentally exhausting. Mood fluctuations become more noticeable in this state. At one moment, you may feel normal or even focused, and shortly after, a wave of irritation or low mood can appear without a clear external trigger. This happens because your emotional system is trying to stabilize while still dealing with underlying activation. The brain and body are not fully synchronized, so your reactions can feel inconsistent or unpredictable. This can create confusion, making it harder to understand why your emotions seem to shift so quickly. There can also be a subtle layer of frustration directed inward. You might question why you feel unsettled or why your patience is lower than usual. This internal questioning adds pressure, which can intensify irritability even more. Instead of recognizing it as a natural response to an incomplete cycle, it may feel like something is off personally, leading to self-criticism or overthinking. Over time, this emotional pattern can begin to affect how you relate to others. Conversations may feel more draining, tolerance for disagreement may decrease, and empathy can feel harder to access in moments of tension. The emotional bandwidth narrows, making it more difficult to stay calm, present, and responsive. The combination of physical tension, mental distraction, and hormonal imbalance all feeds into this emotional state, creating a loop where irritability becomes easier to trigger and harder to regulate. Confidence and self-image are not shaped by one single moment, but by repeated internal experiences that your mind quietly records over time. When the body goes through cycles of strong anticipation, tension, and emotional intensity without a clear sense of completion or release, it can start to influence how a person perceives themselves. This doesn't happen in an obvious or immediate way. Instead, it builds slowly, through subtle shifts in mood, energy, focus, and emotional stability. When the nervous system is frequently activated and doesn't fully return to a calm baseline, the mind can interpret that internal imbalance as something being off. That feeling is not always logical, but it is powerful. You may start to notice changes in how you carry yourself. Posture can become slightly more closed, eye contact may feel less steady, and body language can reflect a quieter or more withdrawn presence. These physical expressions often mirror internal emotional states, even when nothing external has changed. Self-image is also influenced by how in control you feel over your own reactions and impulses. When you experience repeated cycles of buildup without resolution, it can create moments where you feel less steady internally. Even if you are fully functioning in daily life, there can be a background sense of not feeling fully balanced. Over time, that can translate into questioning your own discipline, emotional control, or stability, even when those concerns are not objectively accurate. In social situations, this can become more noticeable. You might feel slightly less present in conversations, more self-conscious in silence, or more aware of how you're being perceived. Instead of naturally expressing yourself, you may start filtering your reactions more heavily, trying to compensate for how you feel internally. This can create a gap between your true personality and how you present yourself, which can gradually affect confidence. There is also an internal comparison that can begin to form. You may notice yourself evaluating your energy levels, focus, or emotional reactions against how you think you should feel. When there is a mismatch, even a small one, it can lead to self-doubt. This is where confidence starts to weaken, not because of external failure, but because of internal inconsistency that is difficult to explain or fully understand. The mind tends to build identity from repeated patterns. If those patterns include cycles of tension, restlessness, and incomplete release, the narrative can slowly shift toward feeling less grounded or less in control. Even moments of success or stability may feel temporary if the underlying internal state continues to feel unsettled. Over time, this can influence motivation, social confidence, decision-making, and how freely a person expresses themselves in different areas of life. Awareness is the turning point where everything begins to shift. Most people don't realize what's happening inside their body and mind until the effects start showing in behavior, mood, and energy. But once you become aware of the internal patterns, how tension builds, how the mind loops, how emotions fluctuate, and how hormones respond, you stop reacting blindly and start observing yourself with clarity. That shift alone changes everything because you are no longer fully controlled by what you don't understand. Control does not mean suppression. It means understanding timing, signals, and balance. When the body enters a state of high activation, it is designed to move through that cycle and return to rest. When that flow is interrupted repeatedly, the system adapts in ways that can feel confusing. But awareness allows you to notice those patterns early before they build into frustration, restlessness, or emotional overload. Instead of feeling trapped inside your reactions, you begin to recognize them as signals that can be managed. The nervous system is constantly communicating through sensations, energy levels, focus, and emotional tone. When you start paying attention, you can notice the difference between genuine fatigue and overstimulation, between emotional irritation and physical tension, between mental distraction and hormonal restlessness. This distinction is powerful because it allows you to respond appropriately instead of reacting in the same way every time. Awareness also creates space between impulse and action. In that space, choice becomes possible. You are no longer driven purely by automatic patterns. You begin to pause, reflect, and decide how to respond instead of being pulled into immediate reaction. This is where self-control develops naturally, not through force but through understanding. With time, this awareness helps regulate the entire system. Breathing becomes more intentional, posture becomes more relaxed, and attention becomes easier to direct. The body learns that it is safe to settle. The mind learns that it does not need to stay in constant anticipation. Emotional responses become more stable because they are no longer amplified by confusion or unresolved internal signals. This process also changes how you relate to yourself. Instead of judging your reactions, you start observing them. Instead of labeling them as good or bad, you begin to understand their origin. That understanding reduces internal pressure, which in turn reduces emotional intensity. You stop fighting your own experience and start working with it. As awareness deepens, confidence returns in a more grounded form, not because everything is perfect, but because you understand what is happening inside you. You feel less scattered, less reactive, and more centered. Even when tension appears, it no longer feels overwhelming because you recognize it as part of a cycle rather than a permanent state. This level of awareness also improves decision-making. You become less impulsive, more intentional, and more aligned with long-term stability rather than short-term relief. The mind stops chasing constant stimulation and starts valuing balance. The body stops staying in unnecessary alert mode and begins to trust recovery. Over time, this creates a shift in identity itself. You are no longer defined by uncontrolled reactions or unexplained moods. Instead, you are defined by observation, understanding, and conscious response. That is where real control develops, not from resisting natural processes, but from fully recognizing them and choosing how to move through them with clarity and stability.